So we'll just do sort of introductions quickly, and then we'll kind of explain the sort of topic and what we plan to talk about. But I'm Alex from Russell's. We're a law firm with over 50 years heritage in music. I head up our digital and tech team, so working at the convergence of tech, digital and entertainment, but with a particular focus on the music industry. Harry, do you want to, hopefully Sony doesn't need any introduction to anyone on the call, but I think if maybe you just explain who you are and sort of where you sit within Sony, that would be very helpful.
Sure. Hi everyone, thanks for joining. Yeah, I'm Harry. I sit centrally at Sony Music UK, so I work within a department called Fourth Floor Creative. So Fourth Floor works across all of our labels within Sony Music UK, be it Columbia UK, RCA, our catalog team, Ministry of Sound. We have a few other sub-labels as well. So I'll work across all of those labels, and my team has a fairly broad remit. So we do focus on engagements with startups, particularly around creative tech or anything that might impact our kind of marketing efforts, rather than licensing, which sits in a different team. But my team also looks after our relationship with some of our big license partners like TikTok, Snap, Meta, Twitch, etc. And we also these days do a lot in the creator area as well. So we've got a kind of creator agency offering within my team. So work a lot around that. And the last kind of 12 months or so, we've engaged with a lot of agencies and tech platforms and partners in that world as well.
Okay, thanks, Harry. So you sort of touched on licensor and sort of relationships or the sort of work you do in your team. So obviously Sony wears lots of different hats when it comes to startups. It might ultimately be a buyer of a startup or an investor, or it might license rights, as you've alluded to. I think because of your focus and because obviously we can't cover everything, we're going to focus today on how Sony works with startups in a sort of customer capacity. Um, so that'll be our focus. So do you want to maybe sort of talk a little bit more about the way in which you tend to kind of encounter startups and work with them?
Yeah, happy to. So I guess there's a variety of different ways. One thing our kind of start point is, and my start point is to spend a lot of time with the labels, with campaigns, and really understand both sides of the coin. Like, what are our challenges? What are we finding difficult? What we're struggling with? And then on the other side, what are the opportunities? And some of that might be market opportunities or kind of ecosystem opportunities. We see a new type of media that seems to be doing well. I mean, really good example of this is in the pandemic when all of a sudden everyone was a live streaming company and we were out there talking to every single one of them. So sometimes it can be dictated by that, but I think having been really in tune with what our challenges are, what's difficult, and what the opportunities are as our start point. And then in terms of how we encounter the startups, sometimes that will be me or one of my team reaching out to a start that we've seen. Maybe it's someone that we've seen in the music press, we've seen a case study somewhere or something on LinkedIn, etc., or we've seen them at a conference. So that could be us proactively going out and reaching out and starting a conversation. Otherwise, a few other ways people tend to get to me. Like, I always look at my LinkedIn messages, and the ones that are personalized and kind of in tune with what I'm thinking are the ones that I'll end up maybe taking an intro call, for example. If I ever get a warm introduction from a contact that I've got a relationship with, I'll always follow that up. Or someone else in the business. So there's a few different routes in. There's no kind of best route, but we really are looking for great new ideas all the time. So yeah, we kind of like to keep the door as open as possible.
So what I'm hearing is that you like startups who approach you to have, at the risk of sounding obvious, to really have thought about your kind of pain points and your specific needs from a kind of Sony perspective. So obviously a startup can kind of guess at what those might be, but how would they sort of better educate themselves to make sure that they sort of personalize the approach in the right way and make sure they understand what they think you need is what you think you need?
Yeah, that's kind of often where you have the best conversations is where someone is really, really on the same wavelength or aligned. I think we've kind of living in a bit of a golden era of information of what our challenges are. If you pay attention to media, if you read water and music reports, listen to various podcasts, etc., you'll have a good understanding of what people are really, really focused on in the music business, and especially at the major end of the spectrum. I think immersing yourself in that and being able to figure out where your idea or startup fits within that, whether it's helping to fix what might be a problem, or actually offering, maybe it's a new line of revenue, or a new way to market an artist, that's definitely the sweet spot. So like coming in with that really innate understanding. On the flip side, I think whenever I have a conversation and it's someone who's kind of making presumptions or assumptions about what our problems might be, often I find there's a little bit of a misalignment there, which, sometimes those conversations can be productive on both sides too, because I will always be honest and say, actually, that isn't one of our major challenges, but your technology could be used for this or X. Like, I see, especially, in the UK, it's a small community of people working in music tech and the labels, and I almost feel like it's a duty on both sides to have conversations where those can be fruitful as well.
And is your door the sort of cliche in Silicon Valley investing about how you sort of investors often don't invest in the startup, they invest in the person, and they understand that a business might pivot. So are you kind of open to the person who sort of comes to you in a sort of respectful way and says, I think your problem's X, and you say, actually, I think my problem's Y, and they go away, pivot, and come back to you? Is that something you see and you're open to?
Yeah, 100%. I think in a former life, I was running a label and a manager, and used to do a lot more on the A&R side and talking to artists, and actually talking to startup founders feels incredibly similar to me, in terms of you've usually got a creative person with an idea that they're trying to make a reality. And I think you can kind of sense the passion, the commitment to making something work. And once you get a little bit further, if you're working with a team, you also get a sense of, well, how quickly do they iterate? How do they take feedback on board and get to the next phase of whatever that cycle of iteration might be? And those are the teams and the founders that we end up working with the most. If the ones that kind of make it easy, work super hard, go above and beyond, that makes it really easy for us to then come back to them with feedback or come back with more projects.
And to what extent do people who talk to you need to understand that um, you might be the first point of contact within Sony, but there's a sort of a set of dynamics within the organization, and then even sort of flying out towards the sort of the artist maybe that you work with, where a startup might have to tick boxes and criteria across quite a lot of people's sort of desks or priorities. So is that something people sometimes misunderstand? They think, I've got in with Harry, I'm away here.
Yeah, totally. I think that can be difficult, especially if you're a founder that hasn't interacted so much with a major label before, is there are lots of layers, right? If I come across someone who's got a really promising idea, and I might say, this sounds great, I love it, would love to do something, there's still a lot of hoops that we've got to jump through together to then make something happen, whether it's me then going and pitching it to the label, or getting a call with the label and the founder and me. And then the label has to then translate that to a manager who's then talking to an artist. Like you've got that for a start as like a tricky pathway. You've kind of there's room to kind of fall over at every single one of those points potentially, which is why probably the startups that we've managed to work with most successfully in recent years have been the ones where you're not really asking the artist to do anything. We're building something around what's already there, where it makes it a little bit easier for the label. Maybe the label just needs to ask the manager for an approval, or something like that, where we can go and build and try something without necessarily having to go through all of those hoops. And then, yeah, on the internal side as well, anything that does touch a music license, if there's going to be any music, then we also have to make that okay with the business development team, licensing team. If it's a product that sits online, there's all sorts of infosec and privacy policy work to be done. Like there's a lot of work around actually just getting something up and running with us. But I do think it's, if you can do that and get to the finish line, you're in a great position to then go and do it with one of the others at this level in the music industry. So I think it's hopefully a bit of a solve for one, so solve for all in some of those respects.
So you're talking about hoops to jump through and sort of infosec requirements. And so can you just elaborate a little bit more on, you meet a kind of passionate founder with a great looking business and tailored approach to Sony and the other majors. But there are certain sort of entry level requirements I think they need to have sort of ticked off before you will consider working with them. So what I guess it depends on the specific business and what they're looking to do, but are there some sort of generalizations we can make here?
Yeah, totally, especially on the tech side. So, one of the first things we'll do, because I know that it takes time, is if there's someone that I've met and has a great idea that I think actually this is something we'd like to at least test, then we'll take them through Sony's InfoSec process where a team in New York will have a really good look at what that tech stack looks like. If there are things that we're concerned about or need changing or need more information on, that's the point at which it would come out. So actually, yeah, having a really strong technical team who isn't phased by that, who can answer the questions with rigor, it is also a huge plus. So we're also kind of trying to figure out if that's the case as well, because we're trying to think, is this something that we can get approval for, even on that side? So even if it's a good idea, is the tech side there for us to get that together? And then if there's anything that touches any data, data privacy and compliance, another team that we will go through with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that it can all come together, which I think all of this makes it sound like it's really difficult or insurmountable. But I guess we, if we find something we want to work with, we will try our very best to guide it through all of those stages. And that's kind of how I've designed my team so that you're not kind of passed around the building to the different teams and left alone to do it. We'll try and handhold through it and try and also, offer practical, pragmatic advice at those different stages because ultimately we want to test as much as possible and we want to find new partners.
Is it sort of fair to say though that if a startup comes to you with some of these T's crossed and I's dotted, and that kind of gives you confidence about them generally as a business? You hear the story about the Van Halen with their brown M&Ms, needing to be taken out of the tour rider.
Yeah,
If somebody looked at the M&Ms and saw there were no brown M&Ms, they knew that the lighting had been set up properly and all that sort of thing. You can sort of read
totally.
into these things sometimes, rightly or wrongly, that people are kind of going about things the right way.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes that makes it easy when we speak to someone and they say, "Oh, we've already partnered with X company." That can also give some comfort that we're like they've probably gone through a few of the things that we're going to ask them to go through. But equally, I think we really like it when we're first to work with someone, or when we even kind of co-build something a little bit together. Then we love to do that, but it's just it does take a bit more time.
So on that, I think, Matt, maybe we'll go to questions in a second, but I just had one question on sort of partnering with other companies, because sometimes we see decks where startups will say, they'll have a sort of page on the deck which will sort of list all of their partners, and sometimes it'll become a little bit clear that maybe partnership doesn't quite mean signed contract or actually working together. It means that they're in the most embryonic stages of a discussion, or they got an introduction to someone. So how do you sort of feel about that, and to what extent should people, obviously they're trying to present themselves in as attractive way as they can to you, but are there risks of sort of over kind of cooking it?
Yeah, totally. And I think that's where it's kind of a good example of where it's good to have tailored decks as well. Like if you're presenting to us or one of our competitors, it's like think about who you're putting in there. Because if you put a Sony label in there and you haven't fully worked with the Sony label, I'll know that really quickly. And then also we'll be thinking what else in here is slightly exaggerated. I rather it when people just say to me, we've had a couple of really great discussions with X label, or, and this is what we're thinking. And that I think is way more grounded and you can kind of jump off really nicely from there. But, also understand that when you've got your investor deck and you might only have one chance to pitch someone that you think you might be able to raise a check from, then you want to put all of those logos in the deck, even if it's just a, tentative, right? And that's, I kind of I understand that. I just tailor it for the customer in a different way, I think.
That's great, guys. Thanks. I think we've got a little bit of a few moments now, then maybe we could open up for questions before we go on to kind of the next section of the discussion. So has anyone got any thoughts, questions that they'd like to give to Harry and indeed Alex? Anything at all? Any questions? It's a stunned silence. Okay. Oh yeah, Michael.
Hi, Matt. It's Andrew Ward here. Sorry, I couldn't find my hand up for the signal, so
yeah.
I was flipping around in the background. Yeah, so maybe I'll just put my video on so you can actually see who's talking.
Got you.
Hi, yes. I've got a quick question, Harry, on one of the points you made about the data privacy and compliance kind of processes that you obviously need to push people through. Do you have anything around that you can share, kind of even on in terms of kind of highlights of the things that you're looking for? Because I could probably reel off a few, but it'd be good to know if we think there are any gaps in what we're doing, whether we should be filling those before we talk to you.
Yeah, totally. I'm not super close to that team, to be honest. In terms of, I don't get in the weeds, but I know that we'll be looking just for how the data is stored, making sure that it's compliant with things like GDPR. We always like to have an opt-in. We never really go for anything that doesn't give people the opportunity to opt out. So we like to make sure that there's a choice there.
This is where you're talking about direct marketing, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because collecting first party data has been a big push for us over the last 12 to 18 months. It is like a big priority. So that is attractive to us. That would fall into the category of, if you've got an idea around how we can do that more effectively or collect some different audiences that maybe we don't already have, then we're all ears. But at the same time, yeah, we kind of do take a good hard look at how that data is collected, stored, actioned, and make sure that that all feels right.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And I think next hand we've got is Michael at Creds. Over to you, Michael.
Perfect. Yeah, I was struggling to find my hands up. I use Teams too much and don't quite know the Zoom when I was clicking around. But yeah, no, it's great. Great to like hear this from Sony directly in terms of like how people work. But I suppose as an early stage startup, we get a lot of the don't go after the majors, don't even bother talking to them for ages because it takes too long. You'll die before you even get anything out of them. So I suppose like if we are super early stage, and we've been doing a lot of work with independent artists, and we've spoken to all of the majors, but like obviously moving them over very, very slowly as they come and taking in feedback and iterating on them. What is the sort of like, what do you think about that where people give advice being like, don't get involved? Should there be just a measured approach by startups to make sure that like we are participating with loads of other people, not putting all eggs in one basket, but make sure that we do engage with you and try and make sure that we're regularly touching base, I suppose.
Yeah, that's probably a good way of looking at it, actually, and look, there's some truth in it, right? Because I think if you go and work for a label and there's two people that work at the label and it's a really quick feedback loop in terms of what I've described before as me having to set a call up with the label then talking to the manager, that's already quite a long time, right? Whereas you may find it quicker to get something off the ground with an indie and then come to us with the case study like that. I always really love to see if someone's done something that's worked elsewhere on a small scale and they're coming to us with a look, this has worked at this level, we'd like to try it on a major artist. That's always super interesting. But having said that, I personally really like it when we're trying to be the first as well. Like I really like talking to people who have got an idea that they maybe haven't fully built out or tested yet, and we can be involved in co-designing that a little bit. So yeah, I'd say that maybe there is some truth to the trope, the well-worn trope, in terms of slowness, but I wouldn't discount the majors. Like as well at the same time, I feel we are really super eager to find new ways of engaging our audiences. It's an interesting landscape at the moment, especially within digital. So if there are ways that we could do something better, differently, to benefit our artists and labels, then we'll always engage and have that conversation.
At the risk of putting words in your mouth, Harry, I know we've spoken in the past about how that question's also not a kind of one size fits all thing, right? So if somebody comes to Sony and says, I want to do Spotify Mark II, or I want to do Suno Mark II, that's a very different conversation than maybe something that doesn't require any music licensing or involves maybe working with a very kind of small amount of music or a single artist. So I think to some extent the answer probably depends on what it is you're looking to work with Sony on.
Correct.
In terms of the amount of time you're going to have to wait before something gets kind of rubber stamped and goes public.
Particularly on the licensing side, that's right. If you need to use music, then it can be complex just because Sony has such a big catalog. Anything that we license has to work for some of those tier A biggest artists in the world, as well as the kind of development artists.
And we've got just one final question before we move on over to Julie at Jam Sesh there. Hi, Julie.
Hi there. Hi, Harry. Thanks for your time today. I just wondered if you could speak to what your team's strategic priorities are over the next 12 to 18 or 24 months.
Good question. Again, because my team's quite broad, there's probably different priorities in different areas. First party data acquisition and being able to get close to audiences is definitely still a really big priority for us. There's been a lot of industry chatter about super fans, and I think that's still definitely true. Really interested in anything D2C, ideas around there. Super interesting, and anything in the creator landscape at the moment, which feels like it's ever shifting, which I think is giving opportunities for new entrants to the market with different ideas as well. So we're really interested in anything that around creator marketing specifically, UGC, creation. I'm still really interested in live streaming and anything around gaming as well. Probably listed like all corners of the market there, but like that is a kind of medium-sized list of all the things that are kind of percolating in my brain at the moment, and probably quite a good time to ask me because I'm thinking doing a bit of future gazing into 2026, like what do we think it's going to look like in 12 months is a conversation that me and my team are having a lot at the moment.
Brilliant. Thanks, Harry. Yeah, over to you guys, then we'll have another opportunity for questions shortly.
Okay, so thanks for the questions, everyone, and thanks, Harry, for all the insights so far. So I think we talked in sort of general terms about how you might become aware of startups, and in sometimes it's passive people approaching you, sometimes it's kind of you reaching out to people proactively. Do you want to sort of talk about other ways in which Sony might sort of incubate a startup? I know you've got sort of specific programs as well, so do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, I'll start with the specific program that we have. So we did launch an accelerator 3 years ago. We're into our third iteration that we've just announced the cohort for, which is our Black Founders program. And the reason why we launched this specifically for Black Founders was off the back of a few studies, one by Extend Ventures, just showing how bleak the picture is for being able to raise VC capital for Black Founders in Europe. So we wanted to do something that hopefully helped amend that narrative, at least in music, where it feels like one of the things I kept saying when we were pitching the idea was the history of pop music is, completely a history of Black music as well. And you couldn't say the same for our platforms where people consume music. So, and previously to Sony, I was working quite closely with startups and a lot of Black founders with amazing ideas. So that was something that I really cared passionately about, having a real specific focus on trying to diversify our pipeline, not just because it was the right thing to do, but also because I had a hunch that it would bring new ideas to us, which I think over the last 3 years we've really seen as well. It's one of my I know you guys will all know Cliff, but one of my favorite moments of I think we're onto something was talking to Cliff, and I think he said, I haven't really heard of any of the startups on your cohort. And I was like, that's okay, that feels like a bit of a marker because I feel like Cliff knows everybody. But that's where we wanted to get to was who are the startups out there who haven't talked to a label before, who have a great idea that we can get close with, try and build out the areas that they may need help on, and then try and drive some case studies. So we've done that quite hands-on over the last 3 years, and super proud of what we've achieved. Some of our startups have gone on to raise money. I think between them, they've raised over 1.5 million. We've worked with some of them on some great case studies. We did something this summer with one of the startups from cohort 2 called Certify, where they drove an augmented reality experience for Sleep Token at Download Festival, which was also geared around us obtaining some first-party data, but just an amazing experience for the fans as well. Some of them won the opportunity to watch the band from the side of stage, etc., and the tech was brilliant. So we're starting to kind of really see the benefits of having a program like that. That said, being part of the accelerator isn't the only way in which we incubate and work with startups closely. I think like IYK is a really good example. So IYK are a company in the kind of NFC space that we've worked with quite a bit. I remember seeing them about 18 months ago, and I don't think they were doing much music, and had lots of conversations with them, again, like a team that were really eager to build, really eager to action feedback. And together we kind of came up with this flow of how to create NFCs that could be chart redeemable in as few clicks as possible, because the existing options needed you to download or create an account or something somewhere, whereas we managed to get it so that on first tap it would report to the OCC, which yielded much better results for us, and something that we co-designed with IYK, which ended up with them having a product that they could then go and take to the rest of the market that had been validated with us first. And we helped them through the OCC, all sorts of different hand-holding bits that we did around that. And that I think I see as kind of almost informal incubation. It wasn't that they came to me with an idea and it had to be perfect first time for me to then say, let's do something together. There was enough there for us to have a conversation where it was like, hey, have you thought about doing it this way? And they were open enough and able to build quickly enough to come back to me and say, hey, we've gone and actually mapped out what this looks like. And then that led to a really productive relationship. Like over the past 12 months, we've worked on NFCs for Tate McRae, Bring Me the Horizon, Jade, Wolf Alice, tons of our top artists.
And is there any sort of difference in working? Obviously, a lot of the people on this call will be in sort of music-specific startups. Is there any difference in working with sort of founders who are coming from outside of music, or have a sort of more general purpose sort of product or service that has sort of music applications but not solely directed at music?
Yeah, I think sometimes those can be the best ones, actually, which is why I tend to go to events meant for a kind of gaming industry or TV and film industry, because I find it really interesting to see what people are building in other areas of entertainment IP. But if I meet a startup and it's not quite a music idea, I always feel like there is a route to it, because we're all trying to do roughly the same thing, which is engage audiences online. If you boil it down to its most simple. And I'm like totally happy to meet those startups as well. And maybe maybe there is a music idea that we can hit upon together, if they're willing to try and open up a new industry for what they're doing.
So sometimes we see the reverse of that as lawyers, where very music focused startups get advised by sort of investors that in order to really scale and to get sort of serious investment, they'll need to find applications in what they're doing outside of music. So maybe there's sort of lessons there in both directions. But
yeah, IYK is a really good example of that. When I met them, they weren't really doing much in music. They were way more focused on fashion and Web3, even a bit of kind of crypto. I think they were invested in by Andreessen Horowitz and more on the kind of Web3 crypto side. But actually now speaking to them, it really feels like their company is pivoting to be just a music company. So I think the market is big enough in music.
that's good to hear. I think everyone in this call will be encouraged to hear that, because sometimes there's some sort of, you do hear sort of skeptics about whether kind of music or music tech is a big enough market for sort of investors to be interested in. And I know MTUK and Matt have done a lot of work around that, trying to make the case that is a sort of misconception in many respects. So in terms of other guest misconceptions. We talked a little bit about the one about whether, you know, startups that get warned off approaching you at an early stage or kind of at any stage, whether that's a correct perception of the role of a major or the attitude of a major or not. Are there other kind of misconceptions people have about labels, or they think you're one thing and you're actually another in reality?
I guess probably a good time to touch on how we work with on the kind of licensing side, because that's another misconception, is that licensing music is going to put off investors. It's going to take a long time, be really difficult. I'd say in recent years, it kind of depends what you want. If you want the whole catalog before you launch right away, that is difficult. But if you want to just test one thing or a few artists, a few releases to validate whether something's actually a product that an audience want, I think we're more open to having that discussion. And I've found that we've managed to get one-off licenses or like a small sandbox of content available for a short period of time, just to test or validate something. So I think that's maybe something where you might think of working with music, talking to a major label, as having to then really put yourself into, right, we need, full music rights discussions to happen. But I think there's a bit of testing and process that can happen before that, at least to validate that what you've got an idea for, what you're building, is something that people want. And then if you do that testing and validation and it looks really good, you've got kind of wind behind you going into maybe bigger licensing conversations.
So sort of writing off a bit less and thinking in a bit of a sensible way about sort of initial kind of modest projects you can work together and then grow from there.
Yeah, for sure, exactly.
So I can't find the raise hand button. Sorry, can I ask a question?
Go for it.
Sure, yeah, go ahead, and we'll open up a bit more after
Yeah,
that.
so I'm a CTO here, but I'm failing to identify tech here, so I'll be really embarrassed not being able to see what the button is to raise hands. I'm finding what you're saying, Harry, very fascinating. I mean, it's especially with the UGC, the creator side, and all the tech or the licensing aspect of it. I'm from a company called Syncfold. We generally specialize primarily, we're content ID providers within YouTube ecosystem, but we've been working on the creator side for a while on the UGC. Generally, we started out just having to have users put music onto videos, and we can then claim that side. And then in our experience, we started to come across contents that particular artists might not be happy with. So we started developing framework and security framework around how we can actually track those channels, track those videos, detect any non-compliance content that may be used, and then of course detect the music within the site. And we've kind of sort of evolved it quite a lot. And part of what we do now is, of course, the licensing and allowing creators or artists to license music within the creators. So I'm just trying to figure out how what we do now fit in with your agenda over time, or the kind of priorities that you have. I just want to see where we can actually see that, or how we can approach you or talk to anyone within Sony to find out if what we're doing right now is attractive to you guys, and if there's a way that we can actually work together.
So you license music to creators to use on platforms, is that right?
It's a bit of a mix. So we have clients who have assets in our CMS within YouTube Content ID, and then they license their music to creators within YouTube. And our job then is to try and track those videos, identify them, and of course they put conditions to make sure there's no violence or political content inside that. And so what we do then is we've created the tech that actually goes into those videos, the frame by frame, analyze the image side itself, and then get the content, see if there's anything that may be breaching the terms of that license agreement. That's part of what we do, just one of the things that we do, because initially we had difficulty people coming and saying I'm too nervous, I don't know who I'm going to give it to, how do I know they're going to comply, even as far as us vetting the channels by going historically, analyzing the actual channel itself. Is it suitable for that particular client? so we evolved it.
I think in general, it's tailoring in terms of approaching us. I think it's tailoring the pitch to what is the kind of what's the pain point or what's the opportunity to the label, how to best kind of boil that down in a way that is super easy for us to see the value of, to then want to test. If it is using music or if it's kind of relicensing music, then that's trickier to test with from where I sit in the business, because we're very focused on marketing initiatives, creative tech initiatives. So it may be that our business development team would be better for a company that needs to use music in that kind of way. But in general, I think whatever your route into Sony, it's just making that pitch super, super clear and like kind of like we touched on earlier, like being really aware of what that pain point is or challenge that you might be trying to solve. And then coming in through one of those routes that I described before. I think that's the kind of best way to set yourself up for success in terms of just getting something in front of us and figuring out if we can then work together.
And thanks for that. And Harry, I've got a question actually that occurred to me from kind of the point that you were raising about sandboxes before. That's something that's been discussed a little bit amongst MTUK, and whether or not there are opportunities there to launch some kind of sandbox of rights for our members to be able to have access to. These things are often great ideas, but kind of fail in practice because there are so many kind of challenges in getting those kind of things set up. What's your view on how possible setting up something like that, particularly in terms of making it available to something like, our full membership, and it being something which could be an offer that we could do in partnership with you, and what are the kind of stumbling blocks to setting that kind of thing up?
I think the main stumbling block is just how different all of the different applications might be to use the rights. It's really difficult to codify the framework that would govern that in a kind of like really simple, you can come and access this sandbox and here's the rights framework and here's how it will work. Like I feel like you don't have a kind of one size fits all. How we've done it in recent years. So one example was a remix platform that I was speaking to called Vibes, where it pulled apart bits of the song into stems, and actually you could come and play with it as a user on their website. You could come and take the bass out, turn the drums up, turn it into a different genre of music. Like really cool idea, really complex rights because it's also touching on remixes and derivative work. So like really quite difficult for us to license as our whole thing. But we wanted to try it. And here's where I also think a sandbox is really difficult is if you think about a sandbox, you'd maybe be like, well, let's go and pre-clear some songs and let's figure out the publishing picture. Let's go and pre-clear those, which doesn't necessarily align to how we would want to work in terms of what is the track that we're actually working right now at this minute. It's probably not in that sandbox, which then makes it a bit harder potentially. But if someone was to come and use a theoretical sandbox to then get our attention, what's better is to come and work with us on a kind of case by case basis. And what we did with Vibes was we said, these three songs we're marketing them right now. They're priorities for us. Let's get these three in there. And actually we kind of snowballed beyond that I think we ended up with around 10 songs that we worked with them on. And it was a kind of almost a bit of a word of mouth, like, oh, we're doing these three songs. Can you also add this one in? Yeah, sure, we'll add that one in. And that was really because it was a kind of one-off thing. We did it for 30 days. It was very limited. It was fairly easy for us to then go to managers and say, we're doing this. Is this, you up for this? Publishers, etc. We didn't have any really difficult works in there with a million songwriters as well. We tried to keep it super simple, but that's a good example of, I agree with you. I think in theory, a sandbox sounds like a great idea, but in practice, I think the scope can be so different for each startup or idea that it can be really difficult to figure out what that might look like, and then aligning with what the label's priorities are is the way you'll kind of have the best results, because we'll be hyper focused on a song and we'll be working on that song. And if someone's saying, oh, I've got this license for this other song that we're not working, then it's a bit misaligned as well.
Yeah, that's really useful. Thank you. And Michael Lim, we've got a question from you.
Yeah, so I was super interested in around the gaming angle, the UGC angle, kind of how they do end up intertwining, especially when so you've got like AAA studios gaming wise will buy out the rights to stuff that they have on board so that they can like operate the marketing elements of their game. But for indie companies, and we're seeing a lot of really cool indie games come out and do incredibly well on fairly small budgets. And they don't necessarily have that purchasing power to necessarily buy out rights to games. So, and their marketing still operates in the same way with UGC content creators that would then be using the game, showing clips of that game, and might be like sponsored content creators in themselves. So a commercial video is created of a game that features potentially Sony music that's been licensed and you still retain the rights for. Where it's becoming a really interesting space to work at, but how does that like licensing kind of issue get how is Sony approaching that kind of quagmire of of licensing back and forth and how is that sort of going to be operated in the future? I guess I suppose you won't have an answer to this question, but I mean it's an exciting point for me, but because that's kind of in the space that we work. But I'd be interested to see kind of your perspective from the gaming side, but also the marketing of the gaming side of things.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I guess on the like kind of AAA titles licensing music for games, that still sits within our sync department, so not something that I necessarily touch. Although where I would come in is where we've licensed something, we're really excited about the game. Can we then do some co-marketing with that game to bring it to life a little bit more? So there's that side. The other side that I think, and the side that we're more focused on, is kind of cultural conversation around games, whether that's something happening in Fortnite or as you kind of touched on, like indie games. Like I've been really excited to see the traction that some indie games have gotten this year, like Silksong or Hades 2 or whatever it may be. And that feels like a really vibrant niche of the internet that we'll try and market into. So even if we haven't got a song in one of those games, we might then think, is there a way that we can jump off the back of this kind of viral conversation that's happening this weekend because a game just dropped on Friday? We might then reach out to the people playing that game and say, hey, like, here's a song we're working, and get them to put it in the background of the content that goes up. Or we might reach out to Twitch streamers and have them use a playlist in the background while they're playing the game, knowing that they've got high concurrent viewers. So it's a way of us kind of trying to get our music where it makes sense thematically or audience wise alongside a gaming title on a different platform, rather than necessarily having to look at it from a sync perspective. I think like a lot of people think gaming and music can go straight to sync, whereas I'm really trying to think like what are the creative ways that we can get into that niche that don't require the kind of heavy lift of a big full scale license.
Yeah, so you kind of get around the whole VOD aspect of it by sticking to live, and then because a great example, and another one's like even smaller budget is Mega Bonk as a game, which it was known for its soundtrack as well, and it had sound packages, so you could have easily just kind of inserted something in there. Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah,
that's great. Thanks for those questions. I'll hand back to Alex now, just to round things off with the final section of the discussion. Thanks a lot.
Sure, I'm conscious of time and that people might have other questions sort of right at the end. So I wasn't going to ask a whole load of extra questions, but I think, Harry, are there any kind of notable successes that you want to spotlight? I mean, you've talked about IYK and given a few other examples, but maybe if we round those off with a few kind of success stories, that might be a nice way to finish.
I think of kind of when I think about this year, I do think that what we've done around NFCs with IYK has been that's been a big success in terms of how we've taken them from somewhere, engaged with them, put them across multiple projects. That's almost my kind of gold standard of what it can look like to engage with us and work with us. And we can hopefully help to springboard to the wider industry.
So maybe if we break that down, how did that, what went right along the way? What was it that is replicable to other music startups that might not be in the NFC space, for example? But
Yeah, like if I kind of break it down, like at the start, I think I approached IYK. Someone had put me onto them. I knew that, the technology was interesting, NFC tech, and it's not particularly new tech either. But it's I think being used in a novel way.
is it
So
worth just giving a very quick explanation of the tech you're talking about?
totally, yeah, near field chip technology. So this is the stuff that drives our bank cards being able to tap for payments or Oyster cards, right? So you've got a little chip inside a physical item. So for us, the idea of being able to tie our physical products with a digital experience felt really exciting. And also the fact that you can keep re-encoding that digital experience, which I actually don't think anyone's fully taken advantage of, but you can make it that something different happens on the 10th tap to the 100th tap, or you can make it the next week you're launching a completely different digital experience. You can really take people through a journey. But where we've used it is to put our albums on an item, a merch piece that people can buy, and then we will have an album chart unit from that. But so we started from that with IYK, designed it with them. The thing that worked really well was that just how quickly they could iterate, how communicative, how open they were to feedback. And then now it's almost coming around to what our current priority is, which is being able to acquire that first party data. So we're working with them a lot in the live space at the moment, for tour check-ins that almost give a holistic experience to users. So you buy your merch that might be a tappable surface, but then you can check into the show, you can see the behind the scenes footage from the show straight afterwards. You can upload your own content, which then we can repurpose across channels. So there's loads of stuff that we've kind of thrown at them as like, here's some things we want to do. We think it could work within this one surface, and they've kind of gone away and made that happen. Which I think that's a really good example. There's a few on the kind of creator side as well. A couple of platforms that are really helping us you know, retain our creators. Like another thing that we're really trying to do is own our relationship with creators rather than necessarily having a third party or a middle person own those relationships. So we've built our own creator network, and we've worked with a couple of platforms on really owning that and being able to track that from a data perspective. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening in the creator area as well. But again, that's a kind of platforms approaching us, knowing that there's a challenge in that zone of like how are specifically music labels working with creators. Because I think if I think 2 or 3 years ago, a lot of the creator platforms were more kind of entertainment or more broad, and kind of misunderstood the specifics that a music company might need from a creator platform. And I think over the last 12 months, you've seen maybe two, three, maybe even four new platforms spring up that are focused on that particularly. So that's a good example of people seeing where the gap is, or seeing something that works for other entertainment verticals and thinking, is this something that the music industry needs a specific version of, and then building it.
Just one last sort of question that comes to mind, I guess, is where you're working with startups, and startups have in mind to work with certain artists. Does it matter that you're in London and an artist might or might not be in the UK? To sort of how much does it matter? How much does sort of jurisdiction or territory matter in terms of who's the right person to speak to at Sony?
Yeah, a lot. And this is something I didn't know. Sony's my first major label job, and when I joined, I did the thing of about 3 months in saying, please can someone explain to me what UK rep means? And it means UK repertoire. So we're responsible for UK rep. So that means anything signed by one of our UK labels. So we'll be the kind of initiators and people in charge of those campaigns, whereas anything that is rep belonging to another market, like US, that will sit there. That doesn't mean that and now if someone comes to me and says, I've got a great idea for X artist and it's with one of our US labels, I can often reach out to the person at that US label and say, hey, this is really cool. do you want an intro to this person, for example? So it's not a hard and fast sort of, if I can't get in touch with this specific part of Sony, then to give up. I think it's actually come speak to anyone and they'll direct you to the right place.
Thank you so much. Matt, I think we'll hand it back to you for any sort of audience questions or anything you want to say at the end.
That's great. I really appreciate that. I think we've got a few more minutes for questions. Anyone got any thoughts at all? Any final questions for Harry or indeed Alex? Harry, I had a question. Do you have any kind of thoughts on kind of future of music consumption habits, that kind of thing? There's lots of talk about kind of streaming reaching some kind of plateau at the moment and what might be coming next. Do you have any kind of views on that at all?
One of the things I'm just really interested by that I've noticed as a market trend, it feels like there's a few platforms coming out with a very limited set of music, almost like a kind of club or like editorialized DSP, which I guess is kind of a natural reaction to more algorithmic recommendation happening. And actually, it's quite fun to see a couple of kind of human-driven recommendation offerings out there, or even stuff like Bandcamp clubs. Like, it does feel there's a little bit of a trend of like, and maybe that's also a convergence of creator as well. Like, creators are often the gateways to recommendations. Why not have them kind of almost recommend you an album every month? That feels like fertile ground that people are exploring at the moment. I'm kind of interested in that.
Yeah, we've got a member called Cantaloupe, Cantilever, who are kind of exploring that space, and it's sort of that.
I saw them. Yeah, I saw them last week.
Yeah, okay. So exploring these kind of niches and this kind of the different kind of groups and the way people can kind of group together. So I think that's really interesting. Yeah, got a few hands up there. So Kim, over to you. Actually, I think Michael was possibly first. I think anyway. Okay, over to you, Kimberly. Yeah, if you want to go first, that'd be great.
Sure. Harry, I can see there might be an interest. I'd like to understand your perspective on music education actually in the sector. Like, where do you see that going? Because I can see one of the Sony cohorts as well. I just like to know what you're thinking from that side.
I guess question back to you, what in terms of which area exactly do you mean? Do you mean at the kind of like a younger kind of almost school end, or do you mean education for companies or artists, like specifically? Because I guess that's quite broad.
Yeah, it is quite broad. And kind of sorry to be so vague, but both really. And I'm sure that you're probably working a little bit more on less on the school end, of things, but it would be really interesting to understand. I can see music education taking a little bit of a rise in the sector and, more education tools popping up, and it growing. I'd just like to see if there's anything on like what you're seeing from a major label standpoint, because we come from more of an the independent side. Yeah, what you're looking at.
I guess one thing we're really kind of hands-on with and trying to promote is kind of digital skills. Like, I think like digital in particular has just changed so much in the last, well, I mean, you could say 10 years, you could say 5 years. And that feels like an ever evolving part of our industry, probably other entertainment verticals as well. But like, I think we're trying to be really hands-on to make sure that the next generation of execs has the kind of digital skills that we're going to need to be able to get the most out of audiences and for artists to succeed as well. So I think that's an area that we're really kind of hands-on and interested in. I think for the education about the industry in particular as well, I think the industry's evolved a lot and is constantly changing. So like, I think it's almost a kind of duty of the music industry to be across that and make sure that that is cascading down at every level, really.
That's awesome.